Meanwhile, let's talk about Rand Paul. So Rand Paul is continuing to stand strong against this new $40 billion aid package for Ukraine. And Mitch McConnell, who of course just went to Ukraine and met with Vladimir Zelensky, is like, no, it's good to have some dissent. You know, we have a strong sort of libertarian wing in our party and sort of vehemently anti-war. And it's good that they ask those questions, but in the end, we'll get there. He basically just dismissed Rand Paul to Zelensky. And so it's important here to dive into specifically what Rand Paul is complaining about and what he wants written into this bill before he approves anything. What he wants in there is specific oversight on how this money will be spent, the same way that the oversight was placed into the Afghanistan war oversight budgets, where we actually had an inspector general who found billions upon billions of dollars in waste and fraud inside of the money that was going to Afghanistan. And so, I don't know if this is a way to prevent it, because it seems like you're going to catch it after the fact. But this is important to know where this money is going. How is this money going to be funneled? Where are these dollars funneling to?
Well, because that spending in Afghanistan, if they did not know that there would be this position, right, then they spent however the heck they wanted.
Right.
So at this stage of the game, if we tell them, like, hey, this money will be audited, there does need to be an accounting for it. You can't just do what you'd like with it. Although, interesting enough, in the newsletter this morning, we wrote about how President Biden had said, hey, any states that have leftover COVID funds, use it for police and law enforcement. Otherwise, we're going to have a violent summer. And that is a very perplexing thing to say. Like, leftover money should be reappropriated towards law enforcement. Who voted for that? Because this was a package that was voted on. This money was voted on by the Senate and the House and had to have agreement from elected officials. So then why can we do that? Like, why can we take what was voted on and then use it for different things that were not voted on? That's very unclear to me. So, this does not inspire confidence in the ability to use this $40 billion for, already I had no confidence in that it would be used for good, but at least, you would hope that this budget that they released last week, this laundry list of items they wanted to pay with this $40 billion would be somewhat accurate. Ish.
The Washington Post wrote an interesting piece yesterday about Rand Paul holding out on this. But one of the things they highlighted is that even the Washington Post is like, this $40 billion going to Ukraine, it's kind of a boondoggle because, Ukraine has already been on the list of countries where they have a thriving black market weapons, underground weapons business. So all of this money is going into weapons that are going to wind up on the black market and in the hands of many of our enemies, just like it did in Iraq, just like it did in Afghanistan. And by the way, where is this money going? A large portion of it is going to fund Ukrainian military salaries. So just think about that for a second. If you know any veterans, or if you know anyone in the United States that might be struggling, just realize that this money is going to pay the salaries of Ukrainian military, specifically Azov battalion members who are fully out there declared neo-Nazis. Here's Scott Ritter, who was former weapons inspector, who was the one who broke the story, of course, that, hey, they don't have weapons in Iraq, and perhaps we shouldn't go to war there. Here he is on where this money is going.
State's taxpayer is being asked to provide money to pay the salaries of the Ukrainian military. Now, this isn't a problem when it comes to the basic rank and file of the Ukrainian military, but what about the Azov regiment, the Nazis? The American taxpayers being asked to pay the salary of Nazi stormtroopers. What about the mercenaries, the International Legion, the Normandy Brigade, and other units of this nature? The American taxpayers being asked to underwrite the salaries of mercenaries. This doesn't even begin to get into the issue of who's accounting for how all the other money is being spent. Ukraine is notorious for being among the most corrupt nations in the world. And right now, the United States Congress is talking about handing over another $40 billion worth of taxpayer money to a government that not only underwrites and supports and sustains Nazi ideology, but is known for wasteful practices of their own. Rand Paul has a point. We need accountability before we start shelling out billions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars, which probably could be better spent here at home.
Plus, when you think about how much of that will be lent, right, on credit,
Right.
in order to fund these military operations, well, people who invest internationally don't typically see Ukrainian banks as an awesome investment, because in recent decades, it is known as their banks are institutions that are run by mobsters and gangsters. Like, it's not an up and up place where you're like, oh, I'll get some really good financial security by diversifying into Ukraine. People don't do that, right?
Right.
And so we're quite sure that they will pay us back.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. I'm sure all of this money will come back to the United States. I mean, well, maybe it will, just like Britain finally paid us back for World War II. And that they finally ended up making their last payments to the United States in like the late 90s or early 2000s.
Yeah, I have some figures on
for
that. Actually.
for our involvement. Like, oh, you need help over there? Oh, sure, we'll come and stop the Nazis. Sure, we'll be happy to help you. You need to be liberated? But you got to pay us back with interest. Like, that's what we do. And that's exactly what's unfolding right now. Not to mention the fact that as of this afternoon, the War Games are underway right now along the Finnish border and in the Balkans, the north of the Balkans. Troops from NATO allies partners are taking part in a series of long-planned military exercises stretching from the high north to the Balkans. This course comes as Finland and Sweden are attempting to join NATO. And Patrick Buchanan asks this interesting question. Why would the U.S. give a war guarantee to Finland, right? Seeing Russia invade Ukraine, historically neutral Finland has undergone a late conversion and decided to join NATO immediately. So it is a great question. Like, why? And from Finnish point of view, it makes perfect sense, right? Like, hey, they're there, they're in the region, they're bordering them. So of course they would want to run and become a part of NATO. But why is it in the United States' best interest to put our nuclear umbrella over Finland? Like, and by the way, we pay. They just donated $500 million to Ukraine, like the European Union, $500 million. We donated $40 billion to Ukraine, and not on top of the $13 billion we've already sent. So upwards of $55 billion the United States has already sent to Ukraine. $500 million has come from the EU, and we are coming across the pond and setting up our nuclear umbrella to make, and what that means is we will protect Finland in the event of a nuclear war.
Yes.
We will protect Finland. We will protect Sweden. So we're all in now. We're all in. And why? So Patrick Buchanan asking this question, like, why should we give a war guarantee to Finland?
My guess of it is, and I'm influenced because I just finished a book this weekend called Inglorious Empire and What the British Did to India, is that British colonialism is sort of out of fashion, right? They just don't do it anymore. They don't go places and plant their flags and say this is Britain. But they still want to, in the same way that America still wants to do that. So instead of using out and out colonialism, they use NATO forces to exert control across the globe. So instead of the Pax Britannica, now we have, and in fact, the story we did yesterday with the writer who exposed the shadow government behind Brexit, right? Their intention was to align themselves with big brother US that had big guns and big money, right? And big cars, and it was fun to hang out with them because they were powerful and they'd smack down any bullies that came near you. So the Pax Britannica is now the Pax Americana, and it's done through military operations, not necessarily colonialism, although it operates very similarly.